At my wife's funeral, I had a surprise. My 3 children demanded a lifetime deal, smiling as if I were about to hand over all my assets to them. What they didn't know was that I had a plan to wipe those smiles off their faces. They went pale at the will. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I never imagined that the worst moment of my life would get even worse. Standing there in my black suit, watching them lower Kristen's casket into the ground, I felt like my heart was being buried with her. 43 years of marriage, and now I was completely alone. The September wind cut through my jacket as I stood at the graveside, my legs barely holding me up. I had lost my anchor, my best friend, the woman who had been my everything since I was 19 years old. The service had been beautiful. Kristen would have loved the white roses, her favorite. People spoke about her kindness, her volunteer work at the animal shelter, how she always remembered everyone's birthdays. But all I could think about was how empty our house would feel tonight, how I would never hear her laugh again, never feel her hand in mine. As the last handful of dirt hit the casket, I felt a presence behind me. I turned to see my 3 children approaching with expressions I couldn't quite read. Marcus, my eldest at 35, wore a sharp navy suit and had that look he got when he was about to discuss business. Jessica, 32, clutched her purse tightly, her makeup perfect despite the tears she had shed earlier. Tyler, my youngest at 28, kept checking his phone even now. I expected them to comfort me, to share memories of their mother, to help me process this devastating loss. Instead, Marcus cleared his throat and pulled out a manila folder from his briefcase. "Dad, we need to talk about some practical matters," he said, his voice steady and businesslike. I stared at him, confused. We were still at the cemetery. Kristen's grave was right there, the dirt still fresh. "Can't this wait?" I asked, my voice hoarse from crying. Jessica stepped forward, placing what I thought was a comforting hand on my arm. "Dad, we're worried about you. Mom always handled the finances, the paperwork, all the important decisions. We think it would be best if we helped you manage everything now." I blinked, trying to process what she was saying. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs, Jessica." Tyler finally looked up from his phone. "Dad, be realistic. You're 62 years old. You just lost Mom, and you've never had to deal with investments, property management, all that complicated stuff. We're offering to help." Marcus opened the folder and pulled out several documents. "We've drawn up what we're calling a family agreement. It would transfer the house, the lake cabin, the investment accounts, everything into a family trust that we would manage together. That way, you don't have to worry about any of it." My mouth went dry. "Transfer everything? What are you talking about?" "Think about it, Dad," Jessica said, her voice taking on that sweet tone she used when she wanted something. "Mom always said family should take care of each other. She would want us to make sure you're protected, that you don't have to stress about money or property management at your age." I looked at the papers Marcus was holding out. Even through my grief-clouded mind, I could see that these weren't simple assistance agreements. These were legal documents that would essentially sign over everything Kristen and I had worked for over 4 decades. "You want me to sign these now? Today, at your mother's funeral?" My voice cracked with disbelief. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. "We're not saying right this minute, Dad, but soon, like this week. The sooner we get everything organized, the sooner you can just focus on healing and moving forward." Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. No more worrying about bills, property taxes, investment decisions. We'll handle all of that. You can just enjoy your retirement." I stared at my 3 children, these people I had raised, sacrificed for, loved unconditionally. Something cold settled in my stomach. "And what happens to me in this arrangement?" "You'll live in the house, of course," Jessica said quickly. "Nothing changes for you day to day. You just won't have to deal with all the paperwork and stress. But legally, everything would belong to the trust, to you 3. Marcus waved his hand dismissively. "It's just paperwork, Dad. Family is family. We're all in this together." I looked around at the cemetery, at the other mourners walking back to their cars, at Kristen's headstone that was being prepared nearby. The surreal nature of this conversation hit me like a physical blow. My wife was dead, buried not 10 minutes ago, and my children were standing here with legal documents trying to convince me to sign over my life's work. "I need time to think about this," I said finally. Tyler's smile faltered slightly. "Dad, what's to think about? We're family. We're trying to help you." "Mom would have wanted this," Jessica added. "She always worried about you handling everything alone. That stopped me cold. They were using Kristen's memory, her love for me, to manipulate me into giving them control of everything we had built together. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. "Your mother just died," I said quietly. "Can we please talk about this later?" Marcus exchanged a look with his siblings. "Of course, Dad, but don't wait too long. The longer these things sit unresolved, the more complicated they become legally." As they walked away, chatting among themselves, I stood there shaking, not just from grief anymore, but from a growing horror at what had just happened. In the span of 10 minutes, my children had approached me at their mother's funeral with a plan to take control of everything I owned. I looked down at Kristen's grave, tears streaming down my face. "What kind of children did we raise?" I whispered to the fresh earth. The wind picked up, scattering some of the flower petals from the arrangements. As I walked slowly back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that Kristen was trying to tell me something. She had always been more perceptive about people than I was, more cautious, more aware of hidden motives. Maybe she had seen something in our children that I had been too blind to recognize. The house felt like a tomb when I walked through the front door. Kristen's reading glasses were still on the kitchen counter where she had left them 3 days ago, before the heart attack that changed everything. Her coffee mug sat in the sink, lipstick stains still visible on the rim. I couldn't bring myself to wash it. I poured myself a whiskey and sat in my recliner, staring at the family photos that covered every surface. Graduation pictures, wedding photos, holiday gatherings. All those smiling faces. All those moments when I thought we were building something beautiful together. Now I wondered if I had been living in a fantasy. The conversation at the cemetery kept replaying in my mind. The timing, the calculated approach, the legal documents ready to go. This wasn't something my children had thrown together in their grief. They had planned this. My phone buzzed with text messages. "Marcus, Dad, just want you to know we're here for you. Let's talk tomorrow about next steps. Jessica, love you, Daddy. Call if you need anything. We should discuss those papers soon. Tyler, hey Dad, I know today was hard. Maybe we can grab lunch this weekend and go over everything." Everything. They kept using that word. Everything meant my house, my retirement savings, the lake cabin where Kristen and I had spent every summer for 20 years, the investment portfolio we had carefully built. Everything meant my entire life. I started thinking back over the years, trying to understand how we had gotten to this point. When had my children become these calculating strangers who saw their mother's death as a business opportunity? Marcus had always been ambitious, even as a child. But I had been proud of that drive when he graduated from law school, when he started his own practice. What I hadn't paid attention to were all the times he had come to us for money. The $50,000 to help him buy into his firm, the $25,000 when his first marriage fell apart and he needed to pay for the divorce, the $15,000 for the down payment on his condo. I had written every check gladly, telling myself I was helping my son succeed. But Kristen had started keeping track. I remembered her mentioning it once, how Marcus always had his hand out, how he never seemed grateful for what we gave him. "He expects it, Barry," she had said. "He doesn't see it as generosity anymore. He sees it as his right." I had defended him. "He's building his career, Kristen. We can afford to help him get established." She had given me that look, the one that meant she disagreed but wouldn't push the argument. Now I understood why. Jessica had been even worse, though I hadn't wanted to see it at the time. The private school tuition I had paid when she decided public school wasn't good enough for her daughter. The $30,000 wedding that had turned into a $60,000 spectacle because, Daddy, I only get married once. The constant emergencies that always required immediate financial intervention. Just last year, she had called crying because her husband had lost his job and they were behind on their mortgage. I had given them $40,000 without hesitation. When Kristen suggested maybe Jessica should get a job herself instead of constantly relying on us, I had told her she was being too harsh. "That girl has never worked a day in her life," Kristen had said, "and she never will, as long as you keep enabling her." Tyler was perhaps the most painful to think about. My youngest, the one I had spoiled the most. College tuition, graduate school, the car I bought him when he turned 25, the down payment on his apartment. He was 38 years old and still called me whenever he needed money, which was often. 6 months ago, he had asked for $20,000 to invest in some cryptocurrency scheme. When I hesitated, he had gotten angry. "Come on, Dad, it's not like you can't afford it. You and Mom have more money than you know what to do with. That phrase echoed in my head now. More money than you know what to do with. As if our life savings, our retirement security, was just excess cash lying around waiting for them to claim it. I walked upstairs to our bedroom, Kristen's perfume still lingering in the air. Her side of the closet looked exactly as she had left it. Dresses hanging neatly, shoes arranged in perfect rows. I sat on the edge of our bed and let myself cry for the first time since the funeral. When the tears finally stopped, I realized something that made my stomach turn. My children hadn't just been asking for help over the years. They had been conditioning me, training me to see their financial needs as my responsibility. Every check I wrote, every crisis I solved, every time I said yes when Kristen suggested I say no, I had been teaching them that my money was their money. And now that Kristen was gone, now that their mother was no longer there to question their motives or suggest boundaries, they were moving in for the final harvest. I picked up my phone and scrolled through years of text messages from my children. The pattern was stark once I really looked at it. Contact only when they needed something. Holidays were requests for gift money. Birthdays were hints about expensive presents. Random calls were always followed by requests for loans that were never repaid. When was the last time one of them had called just to talk? When was the last time they had asked how I was feeling, what I was thinking, whether I needed anything? I scrolled back months, then a year, then 2 years. Nothing. Every single conversation was about what they needed from me. The whiskey was making me maudlin, but the clarity was sharp and painful. Kristen had tried to warn me again and again. She had seen what was happening to our children, how they were developing into entitled adults who viewed their parents as an endless ATM. "You're not helping them, Barry," she had said after Tyler's latest financial crisis. "You're crippling them. They'll never learn to stand on their own if you keep catching them every time they fall." But I hadn't listened. I had wanted to be the generous father, the provider, the man who could solve every problem with a checkbook. I had mistaken enabling for love, and now I was facing the consequences. My children didn't love me. They loved what I could give them. And now that Kristen was gone, they were worried that I might figure that out, might start saying no, might leave my money to charity instead of to them. That's why they had come to the funeral with legal documents. They weren't worried about my ability to manage my affairs. They were worried about my ability to see them clearly for the first time in decades. As I sat in the dark bedroom, surrounded by the ghost of my wife's presence, I finally understood what Kristen had been trying to tell me all these years. Our children had become strangers, and I was just beginning to meet them. The phone started ringing at 7 in the morning, 2 days after the funeral. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold, when Marcus's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, but within minutes, Jessica was calling. Then Tyler. The cycle repeated every few hours. By the third day, they weren't just calling anymore. They were showing up. Marcus arrived first, letting himself in with the spare key he had never returned from when he house sat for us last year. I was in Kristen's garden, deadheading her roses, when I heard his voice calling from the kitchen. "Dad, we need to talk." I found him at the dining room table, his briefcase open, papers spread out like he was preparing for a board meeting. He had that focused expression he wore when he was working a difficult case, the one that said he wouldn't take no for an answer. "I've been thinking about our conversation at the cemetery," he said without preamble. "I realize the timing wasn't ideal, but we really can't afford to wait much longer. Every day we delay creates more legal complications." I sat down across from him, exhaustion weighing on my shoulders. "What kind of complications?" "Tax implications, for one thing. If something happens to you before we get this sorted out, the estate taxes alone could cost the family hundreds of thousands of dollars. Mom wouldn't have wanted that." There it was again, using Kristen's memory to justify their agenda. "Marcus, I'm 62 years old and in perfect health. I'm not planning on dying anytime soon." He leaned forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "Dad, nobody plans these things. Look what happened to Mom. She was healthy one day and gone the next. We have to be practical here." "Practical," I repeated, tasting the bitterness of the word. "I've consulted with estate planning specialists. The trust structure I've designed would protect everything. Property taxes, investment management, healthcare decisions if you ever need assistance. We'd handle all of it so you don't have to worry. And if I want to sell the house, move somewhere smaller, make a large donation to charity, Marcus hesitated for just a moment. Well, those kinds of major decisions would need to be approved by the trust board. That's me, Jessica, and Tyler. But Dad, why would you want to sell this house? It's where you and Mom built your life together. I looked around the dining room, at the china cabinet Kristen had loved, at the family photos covering the walls. Maybe because it's too big for one person. Maybe because I can't afford to maintain it on my own. That's exactly why the trust makes sense. We'd cover all the maintenance costs, property taxes, everything. You'd never have to worry about money again. The conversation continued for an hour, with Marcus presenting argument after argument, each one designed to make his proposal sound like the only reasonable option. But underneath his polished presentation, I could hear the desperation. He needed this to happen, and soon. After he left, I had maybe 2 hours of peace before Jessica arrived with her 8-year-old daughter, Emma. My granddaughter ran to hug me, and for a moment, the weight on my chest lifted. But then I saw the calculated look in Jessica's eyes and realized this wasn't a social visit. Emma, honey, why don't you go play in Grandma's garden while Grandpa and I talk? Jessica waited until Emma was outside before turning to me with tears in her eyes. Dad, I'm scared for you. You seem so lost, so overwhelmed. Mom always took care of everything, didn't she? The bills, the investments, all those complicated financial things. It was true that Kristen had handled most of our day-to-day finances, but she had always included me in major decisions. I wasn't the helpless widower Jessica was painting me to be, but I could see how my grief might make me appear fragile. I'm managing fine, Jessica. Are you, though? When was the last time you showered or ate a real meal? Emma asked me why Grandpa looked so sad and tired. She reached across the table and took my hand. We love you, Dad. We want to take care of you the way you took care of us all these years. The manipulation was smoother than Marcus's legal approach, but it was manipulation nonetheless. Jessica was using my grief, my granddaughter's presence, and carefully chosen words to make me feel incompetent and dependent. What if I said I want to travel? See Europe like your mother and I always planned. What if I want to buy a smaller place near the ocean? Jessica's smile flickered. Dad, you're not thinking clearly right now. Major life changes during grief aren't wise. Any therapist would tell you that. Maybe in a year or two, when you've processed Mom's death, we can talk about travel. But right now, you need stability. And you three controlling my finances provides stability. It provides security, she said firmly. Dad, you've always been too generous, too trusting. What if someone takes advantage of you? What if you make a bad investment? What if you get lonely and some woman convinces you to marry her and take half of everything Mom worked for? The implication stung. Jessica was suggesting I was too grief-stricken, too naive, too susceptible to be trusted with my own life. In her version of reality, I was a confused old man who needed his children to protect him from his own poor judgment. Tyler's approach was different when he showed up that evening. He came with beer and take-out Chinese food, settling onto the couch like we were just two guys hanging out. But I had learned to recognize the agenda behind these seemingly casual visits. I know Marcus and Jessica have been talking to you about the financial stuff, he said, handing me a beer. I just want you to know I get it if you're feeling pressured. That's not what this is about. I waited, knowing there was more coming. It's about family, Dad, about making sure we're all protected. I mean, what if something happens to one of us? What if Marcus gets sued by a client, or Jessica's husband loses another job? Wouldn't it be better if we were all in this together? Tyler was the smooth talker of the family, the one who could make his selfishness sound like altruism. He was essentially arguing that I should surrender control of my assets so they could be available to bail out my children whenever they made bad decisions. Tyler, if you need money, just ask. You don't need to control my entire estate to get help when you need it. He shook his head. That's not it, Dad. This isn't about us needing money right now. It's about building something bigger than just individual bank accounts. It's about creating a family legacy that protects all of us. What kind of legacy? Think about it. Pooled resources, shared investments, everyone contributing their strengths. Marcus handles the legal stuff. Jessica manages the properties. I deal with the technology and modern investments. You get to relax and enjoy your retirement without worrying about any of it. It sounded reasonable when he explained it that way, which made it all the more insidious. Tyler was painting a picture of family cooperation, while carefully avoiding the reality that this arrangement would give them complete control over everything while giving me none. And if I disagree with the decision the three of you make? Tyler's easy smile faltered slightly. Dad, we're your kids. We love you. We'd never do anything that wasn't in your best interest. But I was starting to understand that their definition of my best interest and mine were very different things. Over the next week, the visits became more frequent and more coordinated. One of them was always stopping by. Always with new arguments, new reasons why delay was dangerous, new ways to frame their proposal as protection rather than predation. They brought up my age, my grief, my inexperience with complex financial matters. They painted scenarios of me being scammed, manipulated, or making poor decisions in my emotional state. They used Kristen's memory, their children's futures, and my own love for them as weapons in their campaign. And slowly, I began to feel like I was drowning in their concern, suffocating under their care, trapped by their love. The pressure was constant now, a weight that grew heavier each day. I started to understand how people in hostage situations eventually begin to sympathize with their captors. When someone applies enough psychological pressure, consistently and persistently, it becomes easier to give in than to keep fighting. But something inside me kept resisting. Some voice that sounded suspiciously like Kristen telling me to be careful, to think clearly, to trust my instincts. I just wished I knew what those instincts were telling me to do. 2 weeks after the funeral, I finally worked up the courage to go through Kristen's personal belongings. Her clothes still smelled like her perfume, and I found myself burying my face in her sweaters, trying to hold on to any trace of her presence. It was Tyler who suggested I might want to clear out Mom's things, since holding on to everything isn't healthy for the grieving process. I started with her dresser, carefully folding her clothes into boxes for donation. Kristen would have liked that, knowing her things would help other people. In the bottom drawer, underneath her winter scarves, my fingers touched something unexpected, a small brass key taped to the back of the drawer. I had never seen this key before. It was too small for any door in the house, too delicate for our safe deposit box. I sat there holding it, wondering what Kristen had felt important enough to hide. After a few minutes of searching, I found what it opened. Behind her jewelry box, tucked into a space so narrow I almost missed it, was a small metal lockbox. The key fit perfectly. Inside, I found a stack of papers that made my hands shake as I read them. Bank statements for an account I didn't know existed. Not a large account, maybe $8,000, but one Kristen had been contributing to for years. The statements went back 5 years, showing regular deposits of $200 each month from our household account. But it wasn't the secret savings that shook me. It was what the money was for. Clipped to the bank statements was a letter addressed to the director of Sunset Manor, a care facility for elderly people about 30 miles away. In Kristen's careful handwriting, she had written about wanting to establish a fund for residents who had been abandoned by their families, people who had no visitors, no one to advocate for them. I've seen too many elderly people forgotten by the children they sacrificed everything for, she had written. I want to make sure they have small comforts, holiday gifts, someone to remember their birthdays. My chest tightened as I read her words. This wasn't just about charity. This was about Kristen recognizing a pattern, seeing something that terrified her about families and aging and children who viewed their parents as burdens or resources rather than people. But there was more in the box. A small notebook, the kind Kristen used for grocery lists and reminders. Only this notebook wasn't about groceries. It was about our children. The first entry was dated 3 years ago. Marcus called again for money. 3rd time this month. Barry doesn't see the pattern, but I do. Marcus only calls when he needs something. Never asks how we're doing. Never shares what's happening in his life unless it requires financial support. $43,000 this year alone. I flipped through more pages, my heart sinking with each entry. Jessica brought Emma for a visit but spent the entire time complaining about money. Her husband can't find the right opportunity, which means he's too picky to take a job he considers beneath him. She asked Barry for $25,000 for unexpected expenses, but I saw designer shopping bags in her car. She's teaching Emma that grandparents exist to solve problems with money. Tyler quit another job, says his boss was toxic and the company was going nowhere. He's 38 years old and has never held a position for more than 18 months. Asked Barry for $15,000 to invest in himself while he figures out his next move. Barry said yes before Tyler finished explaining what the money was for. Page after page of observations, dates, amounts, patterns. Kristen had been documenting our children's behavior like a scientist studying specimens, but it wasn't cold or clinical. Her frustration and sadness came through in every line. I've tried to talk to Barry about this, but he gets defensive. He says I'm being too harsh, that parents should help their children. But when does help become enabling? When does love become exploitation? I watch our children's faces when they visit, and I see them calculating. They look around our house, and I can almost hear them adding up the value of everything we own. I had to stop reading and pour myself a drink. The whiskey burned, but not as much as the truth in Kristen's words. Barry doesn't see it because he doesn't want to see it. These are his babies, the children he worked 60-hour weeks to provide for, the kids he coached in Little League and helped with homework. He can't accept that they've grown into adults who view us as an inheritance waiting to happen. The final entries were the most devastating. I'm scared about what will happen to Barry when I'm gone. The children will circle like vultures the moment he's alone. He's too generous, too trusting, too desperate to believe they love him for who he is rather than what he can give them. I need to find a way to protect him. Talked to a lawyer today about setting up protections for Barry. If something happens to me, the children will move fast. They'll use his grief, his loneliness, his natural generosity against him. I can't let that happen. Started the Sunset Manor Fund. If Barry ends up like those forgotten residents, at least I'll have done something to help people in his situation. Maybe someday he'll understand that children who truly love their parents don't abandon them when the money runs out. The last entry was dated just 2 weeks before her heart attack. Marcus asked Barry for $30,000 yesterday. Investment opportunity that he can't explain in detail. Barry was reaching for his checkbook before Marcus finished his pitch. I said no, and for the first time, Barry supported me. Maybe he's finally starting to see what I've been seeing. Or maybe he just sensed my desperation. I closed the notebook and sat in the silence of our bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of Kristen's fears. She had seen our children clearly while I had been living in denial. Every warning she had given me, every time she had questioned their motives, every suggestion that maybe we should say no for once, she had been trying to protect not just our financial security, but my future emotional survival. The secret bank account wasn't just about helping elderly people at Sunset Manor. It was Kristen's way of showing me what happened to parents who gave everything to ungrateful children. She had been preparing me for the possibility that I might end up alone and forgotten, supported only by the kindness of strangers. But she had also left me something else. In a sealed envelope at the bottom of the box was a letter addressed to me. My dearest Barry, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true, and I'm no longer here to protect you from the truth about our children. I know this will be the hardest thing you've ever had to accept, but they don't love you the way you love them. They love what you can provide for them. I've tried for years to make you see this, but I understand why you couldn't. These are the babies we held, the children we sang to sleep, the kids we cheered for at every game and school play. How do you accept that those sweet children grew into calculating adults who see their parents as assets to be managed? Don't let them take everything we worked for. Don't let them turn you into one of those forgotten people at Sunset Manor, alone and abandoned after they've gotten what they wanted. You deserve better than that. We deserve better than that. The money in this account is yours now. Use it wisely. And remember that real love doesn't come with conditions or demands or legal documents. Real love doesn't show up at funerals with paperwork. I've loved you for 43 years, and I'll love you beyond whatever comes next. Trust yourself, Barry. Trust what you know in your heart to be true, even when it breaks that heart to acknowledge it. Forever yours, Kristen. I sat there holding her letter, tears streaming down my face, finally understanding the gift she had given me. Not just the money or the documentation of our children's behavior, but the clarity to see my situation without the fog of denial and misplaced hope. Kristen had been trying to save me, even after death. The question now was whether I was strong enough to save myself. Kristen's letter changed everything. Changed. For the first time since her death, I felt like I could think clearly. The fog of grief was still there, but underneath it was a sharp, cold anger that gave me strength I didn't know I still possessed. I spent the next 3 days reading and rereading her notebook, memorizing the patterns she had documented, understanding the scope of what our children had become. Then I made a decision that would have shocked the old Barry. The Barry who always gave in, who always believed the best about his children. I was going to fight back. But first, I needed help. I called Robert Chen, an estate planning attorney Kristen and I had consulted years ago when we first drew up our wills. Robert was in his 70s, a small, precise man who had built his reputation on protecting elderly clients from exactly the kind of predation my children were attempting. "Barry," he said when I explained the situation, "I'm sorry for your loss, but I'm not surprised by what you're telling me. I see this more often than you might think. Adult children who view their parents' death as a business opportunity." We met at his office the next morning. I brought Kristen's notebook and the trust documents Marcus had drawn up. Robert studied everything carefully, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "These documents your son prepared," he said finally. "They're very well crafted. If you signed them, you'd essentially be signing over control of everything you own. Legally, you'd become a dependent of your own children." That's what I thought. What are my options? Robert leaned back in his chair. "Well, the good news is that you haven't signed anything yet. Your assets are still entirely under your control. The question is what you want to do with them." I thought about Kristen's secret fund, about her letter, about the years of documented manipulation. I want to protect myself, and I want to teach them a lesson they'll never forget. Robert's eyes sharpened with interest. "Tell me more." Over the next hour, we developed a plan that was both simple and devastating. Robert would help me restructure my estate in a way that would give my children exactly what they deserved, while ensuring my own security and honoring Kristen's wishes. The key was timing. My children were expecting resistance, expecting me to take time to consider their proposal. I needed to use that expectation against them. I went home and did something I hadn't done in weeks. I cleaned myself up, shaved, put on decent clothes. Then I called Marcus and asked him to arrange a family meeting for that weekend. "I've been thinking about what you all said," I told him. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I do need help managing everything." The eagerness in his voice was unmistakable. "That's great, Dad. I knew you'd come around. Should I bring the paperwork?" "Yes," I said. "Let's get this settled once and for all." I could practically hear him smiling through the phone. "I'll call Jessica and Tyler. We can do this Saturday afternoon, get everything signed and notarized." "You're making the right choice, Dad." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and laughed for the first time since Kristen died. Not from joy, but from the dark satisfaction of knowing what was coming. Saturday morning, I drove to Robert's office to finalize the documents we had prepared. The irony wasn't lost on me that while my children thought they were about to gain control of my assets, I was actually putting those assets completely beyond their reach. "Are you sure about this, Barry?" Robert asked as I signed the final papers. "There's no going back once these are filed." I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I arrived home to find all three of my children already there, sitting around my dining room table like a board of directors about to close a major deal. Marcus had his briefcase open, documents spread out in neat stacks. Jessica was typing on her phone, probably calculating her share of the inheritance. Tyler was examining my liquor cabinet with obvious appreciation. "Dad!" Jessica jumped up to hug me. "You look so much better. This is the right decision. Mom would be so proud of you for thinking practically." Marcus gestured to the chair at the head of the table. "Have a seat, Dad. Let's go through everything step by step so you understand exactly what we're setting up." I sat down and listened as Marcus explained the trust structure, the management fees they would charge, the way decisions would be made. It was all very professional, very legal, very final. They had thought of everything except the possibility that I might be smarter than they assumed. The house, the lake cabin, all your investment accounts, even your checking and savings accounts would be transferred into the trust, Marcus explained. You'd receive a monthly allowance of $3,000 for personal expenses, and we'd handle all the bills, maintenance, property taxes, everything. $3,000 a month. For a man who had spent 43 years building a net worth of over $1.2 million, they were offering me pocket money. "What if I want to travel?" I asked. "What if I decide I want to move somewhere warmer?" Tyler fielded that question. "Well, major expenses like that would need approval from the trust board. But Dad, why would you want to leave this house? All your memories with Mom are here." Jessica nodded enthusiastically. "Besides, travel is expensive and stressful. At your age, wouldn't you rather stay comfortable and secure?" "At my age," I was 62 years old, not 92. But in their narrative, I was already a doddering old man who needed to be managed and controlled. And if I wanted to make a large charitable donation, something to honor your mother's memory. Marcus's smile tightened slightly. That's exactly the kind of emotional decision we'd want to help you think through carefully. Grief can make people want to give away money they might need later. The condescension was breathtaking. They were talking to me like I was a confused child who couldn't be trusted with sharp objects. So, essentially, I said slowly, you want me to sign over everything I own in exchange for an allowance and the privilege of living in my own house. Dad, that's not how we'd put it, Jessica said quickly. We're offering to take care of you, to manage all the stressful financial stuff so you can just enjoy your retirement. Enjoy my retirement under your supervision. Marcus cleared his throat. Look, Dad, I understand this is a big change, but legally this is the smartest way to protect the family's assets. Estate taxes, potential lawsuits, medical expenses down the road, all of that is covered. I nodded thoughtfully. You know what? You're absolutely right. I've been selfish trying to hold on to control when I should be thinking about the family's future. The relief on their faces was almost comical. Tyler actually pumped his fist in a small victory gesture. I'm ready to sign, I said. But first, I have something I want to share with you. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. Your mother left me something. A letter, actually, and some other documents. I think you should read it before we make this official. Marcus frowned. Dad, whatever Mom wrote, it doesn't change the legal realities we're dealing with. Oh, I think it might. I handed Jessica the letter first. Your mother was very perceptive about family dynamics. As Jessica read, her face went pale. She passed the letter to Tyler, who read it, and then looked at Marcus with something approaching panic. Marcus read it last, his lawyer's composure cracking as he absorbed Kristen's words. Dad, Jessica said shakily, this is just Mom being emotional. She didn't understand business. She didn't understand financial planning. She understood exploitation, I replied calmly. She understood that her children only contacted her when they needed money. She understood that none of you ever asked how she was feeling, what she was thinking, whether she needed anything. Tyler tried to recover. Dad, that's not fair. We love you and Mom. We're here because we care about you. You're here because you're afraid I might spend your inheritance. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see them recalculating, trying to figure out how to salvage their plan. Marcus finally spoke. Dad, even if Mom had concerns, that doesn't change the fact that you need help managing your affairs. You're emotional right now. You're grieving. This trust is still the best way to protect everyone. Actually, I said, reaching for my briefcase again, I've already taken care of protecting everyone. I pulled out the documents Robert and I had prepared. These are copies. The originals were filed yesterday morning. As they read, I watched their faces change from confusion to disbelief to rage. Marcus was the first to understand what had happened. You donated everything to charity? His voice was barely controlled. Not everything, I corrected. I kept enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. The house, a reasonable amount for expenses and health care. But yes, the majority of what you thought you were inheriting is now going to help elderly people who've been abandoned by their families. Jessica started crying. Not tears of sadness, but tears of fury and disbelief. You can't do this. This is our inheritance. We're your children. Yes, you are, I said quietly, and I raised you to be greedy, entitled adults who see their parents as objects to be managed rather than people to be loved. That's my failure as a father. Tyler slammed his hand on the table. This is insane. You're destroying the family over some stupid letter Mom wrote when she was probably depressed or medicated or something. Your mother was never more clear-headed than when she wrote that letter. She saw what you had become and she tried to protect me from it. Marcus was studying the documents, his legal mind looking for loopholes. We can challenge this. Undue influence, mental incompetence, fraud. You'll never see a penny of this money go to charity. I smiled for the first time since they had arrived. Good luck with that. Robert Chen has been practicing estate law for 40 years. These documents are bulletproof. The explosion of rage that followed was everything I had expected and nothing I was prepared for emotionally. These were my children, the babies I had held, the kids I had loved unconditionally. But the people screaming at me, threatening me, calling me senile and vindictive and cruel, these were strangers. When they finally stormed out, slamming the door behind them, I sat alone in my dining room and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. The silence in my house after my children left was different from the silence of grief. This was the silence of liberation, of finally being able to breathe without the weight of their expectations and manipulations pressing down on my chest. I walked through each room, seeing it clearly for the first time in weeks. This was my home, paid for with 43 years of hard work, filled with memories of a marriage that had been real and true and beautiful. My children had tried to take it from me, to reduce me to a tenant in my own life, but they had failed. The phone started ringing within an hour. First Marcus, then Jessica, then Tyler. I let them all go to voicemail. Their messages progressed from disbelief to anger to threats, but I had heard enough. I turned off the phone and poured myself a glass of the good whiskey, the bottle Kristen and I had been saving for a special occasion. This felt special enough. Over the next few days, I began to understand the full scope of what Kristen had given me. Not just the warning about our children, but the model for how to live with dignity when family fails you. She had been planning for this possibility for years, setting aside money for people who had been abandoned by their own children, preparing me to recognize that biological connection doesn't guarantee love or loyalty. The legal challenges Marcus had threatened never materialized. Robert Chen called me a week later to confirm what I already suspected. They consulted with 3 different attorneys, he reported. All 3 told them the same thing. Your estate plan is ironclad. There's nothing they can do legally. What about the undue influence angle? Robert chuckled. Barry, you documented everything. You waited weeks after Kristen's death before making any changes. You consulted with counsel. You were clearly competent and acting of your own free will. Any judge would see through their claims immediately. The relief was profound. I had beaten them at their own game, using their assumption of my weakness against them. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from Sunset Manor. The director, Mrs. Patricia Williams, wrote to thank me for the substantial donation I had made in Kristen's memory. She included photos of some of the residents who would benefit from the fund Kristen had started and I had expanded. Your wife began visiting us about 6 months before her passing, Mrs. Williams wrote. She said she wanted to understand what happened to elderly people when their families forgot about them. She was particularly moved by our residents who never had visitors, who spent holidays alone, who had no one to advocate for them when they needed help. She told me she was worried about her husband, about what would happen to him if their children turned out to be the kind of people who viewed parents as burdens rather than blessings. I think she would be proud to know that you found the strength to protect yourself and help others in similar situations. I drove to Sunset Manor that afternoon. It was a clean, well-maintained facility, but I could see what had moved Kristen. In the common areas, elderly people sat alone, some staring at television screens, others gazing out windows at a world that seemed to have forgotten them. These were people who had raised families, built careers, contributed to their communities, and now they lived out their final years with only paid caregivers for company. Mrs. Williams introduced me to some of the residents. Margaret, 84, whose 3 children lived within 50 miles but visited maybe twice a year. Harold, 79, whose son had moved him to the facility and never called. Betty, 81, who lit up when she talked about her grandchildren, but admitted they only sent birthday cards when they remembered. Your wife understood something that many people don't, Mrs. Williams told me as we walked through the facility. Growing old in America can be very lonely if you raise children who see you as an obligation rather than a treasure. That evening, I called Robert Chen and asked him to make one more change to my estate plan. I wanted to endow a permanent fund for Sunset Manor and similar facilities, something that would continue helping forgotten elderly people long after I was gone. How much are we talking about? Robert asked. All of it, I said. When I die, I want everything I have left to go toward making sure other people don't end up abandoned by the children they sacrificed everything for. A month after the confrontation with my children, I was sitting in my garden when Emma, Jessica's 8-year-old daughter, appeared at my back gate. She was crying, and my heart broke a little seeing her distress. Grandpa, Mommy said I can't see you anymore because you were mean to her. I knelt down to her level, feeling the weight of what my children's greed had cost, not just me, but this innocent child. Emma, sweetheart, what did your mommy tell you? She said you gave away all our money to strangers and now we can't afford things. She said you don't love us anymore. I looked into Emma's confused, hurt eyes and realized this was perhaps the cruelest thing my children had done. They were using their own daughter as a weapon, poisoning her relationship with me to punish me for refusing to be victimized. Emma, I love you very much. I gave money to help old people who don't have families to take care of them. That doesn't mean I don't love you. But Mommy said we needed that money. She said we might have to move to a smaller house. Jessica's household income was well over $100,000 a year. The idea that they needed my money to maintain their lifestyle was absurd, but they had convinced their own daughter that her grandfather was the villain in this story. Emma, your Mommy and Daddy can take care of you just fine. You don't need Grandpa's money to be happy. She hugged me tightly, and I felt the rage building again. My children had done more than try to steal my assets. They had stolen my relationship with my granddaughter, turning an 8-year-old child into collateral damage in their war against my independence. After Emma left, I sat in the garden until dark, surrounded by the roses Kristen had loved, thinking about legacy and love and what really matters in the end. 6 months later, I was pruning those same roses when my neighbor Mrs. Henderson called over the fence. "Barry, there's someone here to see you." I looked up to see a young woman in her 30s standing in my driveway. She was well-dressed but nervous, clutching a manila envelope like it contained something precious. "Mr. Holloway, my name is Sarah Chen. I'm Robert's daughter. Robert's daughter, the estate attorney who had helped me restructure my life. My father passed away last month," she continued. "I've been going through his files, and I found something he wanted me to give you personally." She handed me the envelope. Inside was a letter in Robert's careful handwriting, dated just 2 weeks before his death. "Barry, if you're reading this, then Sarah has honored my final request. I want you to know that in 45 years of practicing law, I've never been prouder of a client than I was of you. What you did took tremendous courage. I've represented hundreds of elderly people who were being exploited by their own families. Most of them give in eventually, too worn down by the pressure, too afraid of being completely alone. You fought back, and in doing so, you probably inspired other people in similar situations to protect themselves. I also want you to know about Margaret Holloway. She's been trying to reach you for months, but your children apparently intercepted her letters and phone calls. Margaret is your cousin Edward's daughter. Edward moved to California in the 1970s, and you lost touch with that side of the family. Margaret is a widow, recently retired from teaching, and she's been looking for surviving relatives. She seems like a lovely person, nothing like the children you raised. I thought you should know that you're not as alone in the world as you might think." At the bottom of the letter was Margaret's phone number and address. 2 hours later, I was talking to a woman I hadn't seen since we were children. My cousin Edward's daughter, who remembered family reunions and holiday gatherings from 50 years ago. She was warm, funny, genuinely interested in my life, and completely unaware of my financial situation. "I've been trying to reach you for months," Margaret said. "I found your number through directory assistance, but when I called, a woman who said she was your daughter told me you were too ill to take calls and that the family was handling all your communication. Jessica had been intercepting calls from my only surviving relative, cutting me off from potential support and companionship that had nothing to do with money." "Would you like to meet for coffee?" Margaret asked. "I'd love to hear about your life, about Kristen. I remember how happy you two were at Cousin Linda's wedding. For the first time in months, I was looking forward to something." As I hung up the phone, I realized what Kristen had really given me with her letter and her warnings. Not just protection from our children's greed, but permission to build a life that didn't revolve around their needs and demands and manipulations. I was 62 years old, financially secure, and finally free to discover who I was when I wasn't being someone's endless source of money and emotional support. The phone rang again. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. I looked at it for a moment, then deleted the call without listening to the voicemail. Some relationships can't be repaired because they were never real to begin with. My children had never loved me. They had loved what I could provide for them. Now that the ATM was permanently closed, they had no use for me. That should have been devastating. Instead, it was the most liberating realization of my life. I walked out to Kristen's garden, where her roses were blooming more beautifully than ever, and I finally understood what she had been trying to tell me all along. Love doesn't come with conditions or contracts or legal documents. Love doesn't show up at funerals with paperwork designed to steal your dignity. Real love simply loves, without expecting anything in return. I had that love for 43 years with Kristen. I would have it again with Margaret, and maybe with other people who saw me as a person rather than an asset. But I would never again confuse exploitation with affection or enabling with love. In the end, Kristen had saved me from more than financial ruin. She had saved me from dying unloved and alone, forgotten by the children I had given everything to. Instead, I would live the rest of my life on my own terms, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could give them. It was exactly what she would have wanted for me. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen.